Doki Doki Literature Club is a visual novel game that was released this past year that follows you, a high school student, who joins the school's lit club. There's 4 girls in the club: Sayori, Yuri, Natsuki, and Monika, who you begin to interact with while writing your own poetry. And while it initially seems like a lighthearted dating sim, it soon becomes apparent that it's a little darker than that. And by darker, I mean it's a psychological horror game, which also breaks the fourth wall, venturing into some intense creepy territory. So today we're diving in headfirst into the plot points that make the game that way, with our top 10 Doki Doki Literature Club darkest moments list. Also, warning, we'll be talking a lot about depression and suicide, so if you're sensitive to that subject matter, heads up. And of course, there are also a ton of spoilers concerning the game's ending too. In at number 10, the poetry you craft. Let's start off this list with something on the lighter side of things. Aside from being a visual novel, the game also incorporates a poetry writing mechanic in the form of a minigame. You're given a list of words you can choose from in order to write your own poem. The use of certain words will catch the attention of one of the girls. They each have their own word preferences, to the point where additional scenes can be unlocked if you write poems tailored to a specific girl. The scenes that you have viewed will determine what outcome your story has, but some of these words aren't the kinds that may immediately spring to mind when thinking of a school writing exercise. Murder, death, depression, grief, and misery, for example, are all words that your childhood best friend, Sayori, is attracted to. This is where the game subverts your expectations. She isn't the happy, bubbly person she portrays on the outside. And at number 9, the poems you hear. The poems of the girls that you read throughout the game are windows to what's going on in their lives. At first, they don't seem all that terrifying or enlightening, but as you progress, their work gets more and more troubling. By the time Arc 2 comes around, the writing gets more intense, and there's even blood on some of the pages. Players have speculated that Yuri's poem, The Raccoon, is an allegory for her self-harm, and that Natsuki's Things I Like About Papa details her destructive relationship with her father. Up next, number 8, Natsuki's father. Things only get worse from here on out, friends. One of the 4 girls in the club that you interact with is Natsuki, and it's implied that she has an abusive father. She prefers to stay at the literature club than go home. She constantly articulates her fear of the reaction her father may have to certain things that she does, and in Act 2, based on your choices, she makes the comment, "My dad would beat the shit out of me if he saw this." It's heavily implied that her father doesn't feed her too, resulting in her malnutrition. Even her poem, Things I Like About Papa, seems to imply that his behavior at home is incredibly negative, to say the least. Up next, number 7, molestation. Taking our last point a bit further, there's been a bit of discussion online about whether Natsuki's father took the abuse further than just malnutrition and potential beatings. Some players have interpreted some of the lines in Things I Like About Papa to mean that Natsuki is sexually abused. In particular, the line, "I like when Papa is too tired for anything," and its repetition, implies that he doesn't sexually abuse her when he is too tired after a day of work. It's incredibly vague, and entirely down to how you interpret the poem, but based on how dark the rest of the game is, it wouldn't be much a surprise if that was the case. Told you shit gets dark. Up next, number 6, Yuri's cutting. Yuri is the most mature of the girls from the group. She's polite, passionate, very intelligent, and carries herself with a certain eloquence. She generally secludes herself, and early on in the game it hints that she cuts herself. You see her scratching her arms under her sweater. We later on find out that her love of collecting unusual knives is due to her desire to cut herself, not out of self-punishment, but rather for pleasure. It makes her feel excited. When her personality is altered in Arc 2, she begins to develop an abnormal obsession with you, the protagonist, and her cutting becomes more severe, to the point where Monika suggests she cuts herself because of a fetish. And at number 5, Sayori's suicide. Sayori, your childhood best friend, occupies the first arc of the game. As we mentioned before, she seems quite bubbly and happy, but you eventually learn that she's been dealing with depression. It also becomes apparent that you mean a lot to her. Unfortunately, this is just the start of her downward spiral in her battle with her depression. Eventually in the game, you enter her house after she starts to become unresponsive, and go into her room to find her hanging from a rope, with her fingers bloodied. Monika later notes that her fingers were that way from clawing at the rope, either due to a survival instinct or because she changed her mind last minute. Regardless, it's pretty dark. And at number 4, Yuri's suicide. Jumping back to Yuri and her cutting again, when Yuri eventually admits that she's in love with you, you're given the option to either reject or embrace her feelings. But regardless of your answer, Yuri will proceed to stab herself, either out of overexcitement or dejection, committing suicide. Colors flash across the screen indicating a time lapse of Yuri's dead body being in the classroom for a couple of days, and you being left alone with it. In our number 3 spot, the end credits. The end credits of the game feature a song written and performed by Monika, all about how much she loves you. Considering that she is sentient and is pretty much responsible for the extreme behavior and the suicides of the other girls, well, that's pretty damn creepy. Gives it a whole other meaning.
Every day I imagine a future where I can be with you.
Speaking of which, in at number 2, Sentient Monica. Turns out that Monica is a sentient being inside of the game. She's the one who's been triggering all of the events that went down, and alters the other girl's behavior during the second act of the game. And she also deleted Sayori from the game after she commits suicide. Monica creates various game-breaking glitches in order to pursue you. She comes off as being quite lonely, being aware of the fact that she lives inside of a simulation where she can't truly achieve happiness. You are the only real part of her world, and it's implied that whenever you turn the game off, she's trapped in a hellish void of noise, lights, colors, and screams. She's aware of when you turn it off, she's aware of when you're recording the game, she can edit the other character files, and her consciousness still exists even when you delete her character file. At the end of Act 3, if you delete her character file, she will realize what she's done wrong, and will create a new version of the game where she no longer exists. Which brings us to our next point. In at number 1, there is no winning. So there's no way to achieve a happy ending in this game, if the rest of the list didn't signify that already. After Monica restarts the game with herself excluded, Sayori is programmed as the president of the club, but this time is a bit psychotic, and begins to act in a similar fashion as Monica did. Monica has prevented her from going off the deep end though. She has realized that there is no way the club will ever have a happy ending, so instead she deletes the entire game. Players who found that unsatisfying tried to delete Monica's character file before the first run of the game, which led to Sayori realizing that she was trapped within a game. She forces the game to close and deletes all of the character files. Upon reopening the game, a black and white screen will appear with Sayori hanging. If you leave that alone for 10 minutes, the words, "Now everyone can be happy" appear on your screen. But say you don't try that, and instead you try to add Monica's character file back if you backed it up on an external drive. A text box will appear and pop up and say that you are being cruel, and that she doesn't want to exist anymore. She'll then delete her own file. Well, that was heavy, wasn't it? The game has acquired quite the cult following since its release, with critics calling it a truly special game and one of the scariest games ever played. As creator Dan Salvato has stated, the game was inspired by, I quote, "things that are scary because they make you uncomfortable, not because they shove scary looking things in your face." The game has been downloaded over 1 million times as of December 2017. Have you guys played this game? If not, are you going to? Let us know in the comments below. If you dug this video, please show us some love by hitting those like and subscribe buttons. And don't forget to share it with a friend. If you want more gaming vids, why not check out our channel and our recent uploads playlist. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I've been Kelly Pally and this has been Top 10 Gaming. Catch you all in the next one.